One question we get a lot is how to program marking, and this video will cover how to do that in IGEMS. If you're using WordCam, there's a separate video on how to do it in WordCam. So let's say a part like this, we want to mark or etch these lines here, maybe mark the part number, and maybe we also want to mark where these circles are, and then everything else we're going to cut. So we'll walk through how to program that. First of all, your parameters for your marking would be in your material database. So I've got my material selected here. Click on your material edit button. And if you go to the top level of the material, so I'll click on stainless steel, we have this AWJ tab and marking parameters. First of all, you have this choice here whether you want to use abrasive or not. So if you want a very light mark, you can turn that off and just do water only. And if you use abrasive, then it'll be a bit deeper. And then you've got things like what speed you want to do your marking at. And this would be if you're trying to mark a point, how much of a delay there would be there. Special marking speed doesn't apply to what we're doing. And then up here you've got check boxes about whether you want to do your marking at high pressure, basically the same pressure as you're cutting at, and if you want to use a different abrasive flow. And then depending on our settings in our machine settings, for example, if I uncheck this, if I'm using a standard mini hopper, and if we look at our different mini hoppers, on the left we've got our manual mini hopper. So for people that are cutting mostly metal, then this is usually the mini hopper that you'll get. Has the slider on the front that you'll set to one number most of the time. But when you are doing your marking, you might want to set this down at a lower number, especially if you're doing it at lower pressure, because when you're marking at lower pressure, say 20,000 psi, you're not able to suck as much abrasive into the cutting head. If you leave it up at the high setting, then you'll probably overwhelm the cutting head and choke it off. So when if you are doing a low pressure marking, you'd want to slide this down to a lower number there. And as far as what the number is, that just depends on the application, how deep of a mark you're trying to get, and that just requires some trial and error. If you've got the smart feed mini hopper, then when the pump goes into low pressure, then this will automatically make this wheel spin at a lower rate, letting less abrasive down to the cutting head. And then you could just calibrate that low pressure speed on the mini hopper to be whatever sort of flow rate that you want to do for the marking. So if you have the mini hopper like on the left, the manual mini hopper, we can put an M00 code into the program. So at the beginning of the program, we'll put M00 to stop the machine, to give the operator the chance to make sure that this is at the low pressure setting for the marking. And then again, when the pump switches up into high pressure, there'll be another M00 which will stop the machine again with a message, and then that signifies to the operator that he needs to slide this back up to its normal high pressure setting. So if you do want to do a different abrasive flow rate when you're doing your marking, you would uncheck this box here. Now the number that's in here doesn't control anything on the mini hopper. It will put this number into the CNC files so that the operator can know what to set it at. And then similar thing, if you want to do low pressure marking, you would uncheck this, and again, this doesn't control anything on the pump, but it would just be a signal. We would put that M code into the CNC file to tell the pump to go into low pressure. So for this example, we'll do it with abrasive at lower pressure, and we'll be doing 25 inches a minute. Now under machine settings, we just want to check these before we go much further here. If you go down to the cutting equipment area, we have the check boxes and the buttons to tell the IGEMS that we can send codes through the CNC file to turn the pump on and off, and also switch between low and high pressure. And then down here we've got buttons to signify whether we've got the manual mini hopper or the smart meter mini hopper. You'd use the high-low abrasive control button here. We're going to assume that we've got a manual mini hopper, so we'll turn that one on. Also on this cutting equipment tab, if you scroll down further, At the bottom you've got your delays for marking, so delays between water and abrasive on if you're using the abrasive when you're marking, between water and abrasive off and moving and such. So generally you want these delays to be very short. You don't want the cutting head sitting there very long when it first does its pierce, or at the end when it's shutting off. So very short delays typically for those marking numbers there. Also, if you scroll down a little bit further, in case you need to adjust them when the pump is going between low and high pressure, these are the numbers that control that. So that's where you can adjust those numbers. Okay, so now let's go ahead and create our part. So when I create, I'm going to drag a box around this, of course. Now this selects everything that's closed contours. It's selecting these open contours, but we're going to have to select those later as open contours to tell IGEMS that we won't put marking on there. So normally IGEMS assumes that we don't want to do anything with any sort of open contours. If we want to mark these circles, we want to deselect them at this point. So I hold down my Shift key and I click on these, I deselect these, and then in the next window here we will select those and then be able to apply marking to those circles. So we hit enter and we have our preview box here and we see all the things that we want to cut. And then if I choose other objects, I can drag a box around this, left click, drag, left click. So you see it selects everything else that I hadn't selected before. Hit enter again, brings us back to here, and in the preview window you can see these other entities in the magenta color there. So click on OK, and now we can use our marking. So up here on our cam tab, under the toolpath area, we've got the marking option. If I click on multi, I can just drag a box around this and IGEMS will determine the best path between all those cuts. If I prefer, I can click on single and I can individually click on these in the order that I want to do it at. And if I have a preference on which end of a line I want to start at, I would use the single, and you can click on the end of the line that you want to start your marking from. In this case here, I'm just going to do multi, and we'll just drag a box around everything. Highlights in yellow what it's going to be choosing for the marking, hit enter, and now we've got our marking toolpath on there. And then from there, of course, we can do our contour button to add the rest of our cuts, our toolpath for the actual cutting. And if I go into my edit command here, click somewhere on the perimeter of the parts, brings this up. So you can go through here. If you need to reorder the markings, you can use this box here. So it finishes all the marking and then does the cutting. And if you're happy with all that, we'll just go ahead and take a look at the code. So just want to check, if you haven't done it before, go into settings, and under strategy, under the various tab, you want to make sure that skip pressure changes is either set to no or no but ask, and skip abrasive flow changes is also set to either no or no but ask. Then in that way it'll put the M00 codes in there when it sees those abrasive changes. So we'll just do the 2D preview. So we've got our checkbox here. We're not going to skip abrasive flow changes, so I'm not going to check that. And here at the beginning of the program, we've got our M100.02, tell the pump to go into low pressure. You can see the comment here, start of marking. We got our delay to go to low pressure. And then we have an M00, and you see in the parentheses there's a comment, set 0.5 pounds. So that again would signal the operator to move that slider to the appropriate setting for the marking. And then it's going to go ahead and do the marking, and we can see the feed rate here, 25 inches a minute for the marking. And then we've got the code here now, end of the marking section, start a cutting section. M101.02 puts the pump into high pressure. Again, there's the delay to go to high pressure. M00 triggers the operator to then move that slider back to the high pressure setting on the mini hopper, and then we'll continue on with the cutting from there. So if you have any questions on that, let me know. Thanks.